Hello, greetings everybody, and welcome to another edition of Then, Now and the Future. And we've been working our way through the latter part of the 20th century. We did something on the 50s, 60s, got into the 70s too, and then sort of early 80s. This is when I was born in 65, so I was coming into mid to late teens then. And Marcus, what about you at this stage?
Oh, crumbs. I would have, the 80s, I would have been late 20s, 30s.
Yeah, okay. So we're getting to this area where we have more and more clear memories. So when we started in the 50s, so I didn't have any, Marcus had plenty of things to say there. What I wanted to do today, we started talking about education, obviously, again, because that was when it was relevant in that period. And I wanted to go a bit more down the question of spirituality and religion, because this has played an important part in my life. So that's what the broad direction will be today, Marcus.
And a major part in my life, but for very different reasons.
Yeah. Okay, so that's the interesting thing. The first thing to say here is that we sort of come from very different backgrounds in many ways. And the first interesting difference is that Marcus was brought up in a religious environment and moved away from that, whereas I was brought up without any, at least at home, there was no religion at home. But I began to look for that in my whole life, but including my home life. So that's the first difference, Marcus, isn't it?
Yeah, and different religions as well. So
yeah.
I come from a fairly religious Jewish background.
Yes.
Which, as you've just said, I've gradually moved away from, whereas you come from a Christian background, but a non-religious background, and have moved deeper into that. So interesting, I think, to explore how, when, and why that's happened to us.
Yeah. Okay. So I think I'll start with the background for a typical English person. Sort of statistically would be Church of England. That's the sort of title used, and in fact, that was the case with me. My father's side of the family was sort of churchgoers. My grandfather was a churchgoer to the end of his life. My father's father, I remember that. I remember going to his funeral in the Church of England. And he was a church warden, I think. So he was very involved. And my aunt as well was a regular churchgoer. And I think my father was sort of lapsed when he was a teenager. He was in the choir, but that stopped. So by the time I was on the scene, my father was a non-practicing Anglican, and my mother was basically from a sort of non-conformist background, my grandfather on that side. So, Protestant in the broader sense, but not really. I think my grandfather was not he didn't practice any religion. So that was the background. That's what I grew up without any religion at home, basically.
Right.
But you did. You had lots.
Yeah. So I had a fairly religious upbringing. My mother came from quite a strict Jewish family. My dad didn't. My dad's family ran a pub in the East End of London. Weren't terrible. So he was Jewish, but not
okay. Mm-hmm.
So not religious. And yes, I grew up in a home where we followed all the dietary rules around kosher food. We celebrated all the festivals. My older brother and I both went to synagogue regularly. I went to Hebrew classes, which I guess is the equivalent of going to Sunday school, except that I had to go twice during the weekend and again on a Sunday. My brother and I were both bar mitzvahed when we were 13, which is when you become of age, you are deemed to be a man at 13. So yeah, a fairly religious upbringing that over the years I've moved away from for various reasons.
Okay, well, maybe we'll talk more about those. Yeah, I just wanted to talk about some of the, as I was growing up without religion at home, what the input was. And that was in the form of Church of England Primary School, which was, and I mentioned this last time, you know, we had the morning assembly, there was a big hymn flip chart, if you like, on the wall. And
So was that your first taste of religion as such?
I think you could say so, yeah. That's that whole primary school experience, yeah. Before that, I don't remember anything. So that, yeah, I suppose going to see my grandparents was, you know, they perhaps took me to church sometime. I think that's right. My step grandmother knitted kneelers. You know, these kneelers that you have. I don't know if you've seen this, like a sort of soft cushion block thing, and she knitted or crochet, you know, the pattern on that. So that was another one. Yeah, some sort of connection there. And yeah, and then I went to secondary school, or independent day school as it was, and that was also Church of England. You know, we had chapel, the Psalms were read. You know, the headmaster was getting us to learn on the Sermon on the Mount. And I had a friend who was like an evangelical Christian, and I used to have lots of chats with him. And I once went on a day trip to London or something with people from his church. So I had, you know, that was probably the most at the intellectual level, actually discussing with them what beliefs were. But there was no, and then, oh yes, of course there was Scouts, wasn't there? Cubs and Scouts, and that was connected with the church. We actually went into the church building, and we had a flag, and we went in there. So a lot of connections, actually, without any actual spirituality in person and at home.
So lots of connections, but no teachings.
Well, no, yeah, I would say no, yeah, no personal commitment. And I remember sometime, well, I don't know if it was my 16th birthday or whatever it was, but around that time, I said, "What would you like for your birthday?" Spiritual enlightenment. That was, you know, it was this, for some reason, I had this idea that I wanted spiritual enlightenment. You know, this is a bit of a just a general memory of that time.
Yeah. But so what did that mean to you at the time?
Well, it's a good point. It's a good question. There was I think something to do with an emptiness in the routine. You know, in that teenage stage, it was into that sort of parties and so on, just to sort of having a bit of a wild time at that stage in life. And that was sort of fun, I suppose, the first few times, but then it just seemed to be, okay, but we're still doing this after 6 months, a year, 2 years. There's the playbook hasn't really changed. And I just thought, well, really, is that it? You know, something like that.
Yeah. So were you searching for some sort of meaning?
Yeah, precisely. You know, some meaning, something deeper than just, well, okay, we go to school, we go to a party, you know, we have a social life.
Yeah. Wash, rinse, and repeat.
Yeah. Where's it all going? You know.
Yeah. Okay. So that's quite. How old would you have been then? Because
that's 16. That's, you know, because, you know, again, we're talking about, that's why it's early 80s. This was happening in the early 80s. You know, I can remember that period. You know, and it goes back to there was that whole, you know, rock culture from the early 70s. You know, and we had some of the trappings of that, and the Indian connection. You know, like the Joss Sticks.
Yeah.
And the Smells. You know, and there was that connection with the Indian trip and so on. But most of it was just like the rock music that we thought was great, you know.
Okay, so let me ask you: was it actually the religion that you were interested in, or was it the fact that you had this mystical thing going on?
Yeah, I mean, that's it, and that's what, and this would be a recurring theme, I think, that it was a mystical need. It was a mystical need, that this whole thing of spiritual enlightenment. I wasn't saying I need to be religious, I need to follow some rules, you know, I need to go to church as such, but that something inside was missing, you know, this sense of emptiness or pointlessness of life, something like that. So that was the key issue.
Okay, so for a lot of Christian people, they see Christ as a savior.
Mhm.
So do you think at that time you were looking for some sort of
Well, I
mentor?
remember
Or-
discussing, with this, evangelical Christian, and obviously that was what he was presenting to us. I remember, I mean, just to be very sort of, what's the word? Some local color here. There's a rock band called AC/DC. You probably
Yeah,
heard of them. Famous, very famous rock band. I was one of their followers back in the day, and they had a song called "Highway to Hell,"
yeah,
which you probably know all about. and uh, and my friend said to me, "Yeah, well, at least they know where they're going."
yeah. Because there's a very famous Facebook joke, isn't there? Isn't there? There's a highway to hell, but only a staircase to heaven.
Yeah. That's it. Precisely. So I mean, just that puts it in that was the time, when that was released. I remember, I think I bought that record, so that showed where I was at that time. But somebody said to me, well, yeah, but it's real, it's not just some sort of, when you listen to this stuff, I mean, if you listen to their music, their words, they're so explicitly, like, let's say, satanistic, really, but it's like it's a joke, okay, if people thought it was really the case, they wouldn't go along with it, but it's just like, it's just, some sort of thing that we say. So anyway, that's just one aspect of it. And I began, so in my later teens, as I was nearing the end of my school time, I began to read some spiritual writers like C.S. Lewis. I think that would be the most famous one who I read. Not his
Really?
Narnia. Obviously, I read his Narnia books as a child, but this he wrote about Christianity as well, as you probably know.
No. I
You
don't.
weren't aware. No, he was an Anglican, and he wrote about Christian issues.
Oh, okay. So there's an interesting contrast, isn't there, between sort of the fairy stories and and the opposite.
Yes, yeah, that's right. I mean, there's a controversy among Christians about whether his writing is really orthodox, or what he was trying to say in those books, whether it's allegorical of Christianity, and that's another story. I don't want to go down that rabbit hole. But he certainly wrote, his books on, one of the books he wrote is called Mere Christianity, and it's very well known.
I was going to say, we leave the rabbit holes to Alice in Wonderland.
Yeah, sounds more appropriate.
Yeah. So how did that sort of carry on developing for you?
Okay, well, that's a very, very good question. So the form this took was, now I mentioned last time there was this Oxford Cambridge thing, which our school did this sort of fast track, right?
Yeah.
So you took your A levels basically a year early, and then there was the new academic year that started. The first part of that was given over to the Oxbridge exams. So you basically automatically had a year out, because once those exams were over, you were free. So that was what happened for me in that year out. Is I went to work for an insurance company as a computer operator. This was a job I think my uncle helped me to get on the South Coast. And so that was my first living away from home for any length of time. And, I shared a flat with some young adults. I guess they were in their early 20s. I went to work. It was like a shift work. I used to work, either night, evening, or day. But it was the sort of freedom of being away from home. And yeah, and I was, and then towards the end of that time, I had the opportunity to go to the Far East with my friend's brother was a helicopter pilot, and he said, you can come out here, just get your airfare together, and the rest we'll put you up. So I had this exotic trip: Malaysia, Thailand,
Wow,
Singapore, that kind of thing.
Excellent. So, okay, you had these foreign trips, but how did that knit in?
So yeah, so the connection is that I began to read, before I went there, I was reading these spiritual books. There was a man called Bede Griffiths. He was a Benedictine monk, I think. But he went out to India and he set up a sort of ashram. So he tried to basically, he had a book called The Marriage of East and West, and he wanted to marry Western Christian spirituality with Hindu spirituality, and he sort of set up what's called an ashram. Do you know that term?
Yeah.
And so I read one of his books, and I was really actually very enthusiastic about it. And I just felt there was something here more than just, just religion as rules. Okay, you were talking before about how, why all these rules and stuff, but there was this mystical element, and that's what attracted me.
Yeah, because I suppose there's a mystical element to Judaism as well.
Yes.
Which is not one I've ever explored, but I'm the Kabbalah.
Yes. Yes.
Which is the mystical side of Judaism. Not something I've ever looked into. But yeah, for me, I think religion was just this never-ending list of rules and and if you didn't follow it all pretty strictly, then it was all sinful and you were bad, and I just didn't get it. And I think one of the points before we started recording that I made to you, and I'm sure it's as true of all religions, is that you mix and match your your willingness to follow a religion. So you do the bits that in my family, mum kept a kosher household. She was a typical Jewish matriarch.
Yes.
We observed the festivals, but they only went to synagogue on the 3 high holy days, New Year and the Day of Atonement. But up until 13, my older brother and I had to go to synagogue every Saturday.
Yes.
We had to go to our religious classes, our Hebrew classes 3 times a week. Mum would light candles to see the Sabbath in on a Friday, but she would still cook and would still sit and watch TV. My brother and I would go off to football on a Saturday afternoon after our religious duties had been done. So, and the other thing that I could never get my head around was why it was sinful to eat different types of food. Why was one type of food perfectly okay, but another type of food, well, you were, heaven forbid that you would eat a piece of bacon or a piece of pork, because but how can these these types of food be sinful? And then I think, like a lot of societies, religions and societies, I was expected only as a child to have Jewish friends.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Really?
And I went to a Jewish youth club when there were still such things as youth clubs. And I think, well, now hang on, why can't I mix with other people? Why can't I go out with them? Why can't I be with them? Why can't I share food with them? Why? So
that was a key factor for you, and you broke away from that, did you? Quite.
Absolutely. Plus the fact that I think on a wider basis, you look back over history, and so many wars and things have been fought over religion, and so much time and effort has been spent trying to convert people from one way of thinking to another way of thinking. My religion's better than your religion, therefore you're a heathen and I've got to convert. Really, I'd much rather live in a society where we all just get on. And maybe that's a very simplistic way of looking at things, but I just tend to think, for me, I see religion as being a bit divisive.
Well, it's certainly a divisive topic.
Absolutely. But it's great that it doesn't stop you and I from having this sort
Well,
of.
that's it. And I think we have to, we have to discuss. That's it. It's one thing to discuss these, and it's another to try and solve the problem. But I think just, coming from very different backgrounds and just sort of explaining what our background is can only be useful for anyone who's interested in trying to understand things better.
Yeah, I mean, you can in one way you can understand that people would want to keep their traditions. They don't want to see their traditions watered down and eventually sort of evaporate.
Yes.
But on the other hand, that can be quite restraining as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately religion is about truth claims, the idea of truth, that there is something's true and something isn't. And I'm a complete believer in that something is true. For example, a Hindu will say, well, if you die, when you die, your soul transmigrates. It goes into could be another human, or it could be an animal or something, depending on your karma. Whereas Christianity has always said that no, when you die, there's judgment, before God, and you will either go to be with God or not. And these are two different understanding, but they both can't be true at the same time. Okay.
Well, I was just going to say they both can't be true.
That's right. One of them is true, or none of them are true, but it's not possible that both of them are true. Okay. Yeah. So for me, that's always been important. But over the years, I've just come to realize, well, yeah, I have developed a very, very precise view of what's true. It becomes more precise by the year, but it's not my position to discuss that. It's not, with somebody who doesn't want to. I'm open to discuss it with anybody at any time, but most people just don't really want to go too far down that road. So fair enough, and so I will avoid, imposing any views. I mean, if people want to say what's true, what isn't, well, okay, I think there's reason for believing some things rather than others.
But I have to say, hand on heart, as I get older, it's a question that taxes me more and more. As you see that there's a lot less ahead of you than there is behind you.
Yes.
So sort of, where's that leading to?
Yes, sure. Sure.
I have to say that's a question that has started to tax me more as I get older.
Yeah, well, I think that's perfectly logical, actually.
And if only there were an answer.
Well, there is. It's just a question of, it's all about free will, and it's all about, coming from where we are. So people have to, I mean, this whole thing of religion, we just see, I mean, if, when I was a teenager, what I saw of religion was just like sort of routine and words and stuff. We had the scout leader would used to say this prayer every time. I remember that prayer, about, it was for sea scouts, those who go down to the sea in ships and occupy their business in great waters, and so on. And that's stuck with me forever. But it was some sort of routine, some sort of thing, but I hadn't really worked out, what's the foundation of that. And I guess most people around me hadn't either.
Yeah. So where are you now with religion? Is it a belief? Is it a mysticism? Is it
right? Well,
what does it mean for you now?
Yeah. Okay. Well, have to sort of compress what happened. So it's just, I think, to compress what happened after that. From the trip to the Far East, and when I came back, and I took up my studies at the University of Bristol. I was there to study physics. That was because I studied mathematics and physics A levels. Spent 2 years basically doing mathematics, further mathematics, physics, and my mind was just full of numbers, and I just felt the physics was just like more of the same. The physics degree was more of the same, and I was like really wanted to look at these issues of spirituality, philosophy, Eastern religion, and at the University of Bristol there was that opportunity to study theology and religious studies. So I switched after just a few weeks, it was, and quite, I guess people were quite perturbed by this. It was a pretty crazy thing to do, but that's just sort of characterized my life, really, that scuppered my chances of a good career in many ways. But just on the principle of, what's this all about? Now it's become a Cinderella subject. It's become marginalized, whatever. And I was in a yoga group for most of my time at university. I went to India twice. So in addition to that, going to Malaysia, I went to India with this yoga group. And that was coming back to this idea of truth. What is truth? That I felt here was a group of people who believed this, and they had a sense of community, and there was a real spirituality in that.
So here's an interesting question, because I think your life could have taken a completely different track.
Yes,
so studying physics, you could have
yes.
gone, I suppose, into things like particle physics,
yes,
and science and the universe and the
that kind of thing.
but I guess science and religion are not happy bedfellows.
Well, that's another rabbit hole. I mean, I think real science and real religion are fine, because truth is truth. We're talking about truth. But I think just like you have true religions and false religions, you have true science and false science. You have a lot of so-called science, which is actually funded by huge vested interests. And on the basis of those interests is coming to certain foregone conclusions. So science, real empirical, but actual real observation, seeing what that means, it's not so common, it's not such a mainstream thing. So, I've no problem with the idea of science, but I think a lot of what passes for it is not that.
But as I say, studying physics, though, your life, had you decided to go down?
Yeah, I mean, who knows what that would have led to, but yeah, some sort of career in that line of that side of things.
Yeah, I remember reading a book once, and it was quite an interesting construction, because you'd read a page, and at the bottom of the page, the character would have a choice of doing one thing or another.
Oh,
so
yes.
If you chose option,
right, you could choose.
You turn to page 20, and
okay,
and I think our life's like that.
Yes.
We constantly get to the bottom of the page with an option to go A or B.
Yeah, that's it. And for me, I have to sort of go back to that, because it has had all sorts of consequences, and various decisions since then. And try and, it's always good to sort of remind yourself what you did and what's the significance of that. So, I mean, because you answered a very big question where I am now, but that's a big question. But that was the beginning of what happened. And then after that, I can say that the theology helped me to discern, false and true religious claims, and to see inconsistencies within this yoga group, for example. So I eventually left that. And then I spent a lot of time with the Church of England in a sort of voluntary capacity. So my post-graduation years was like exploring, could I be a clergyman in the Church of England? That was the theme, I guess. And I was in many different parishes and situations in that respect. And in the end, the answer was no. It sort of fell out. I couldn't find some place in that. I found a lack of principle, more that it's more about being in the club rather than actually believing something and holding to that. And then I was in sort of non-conformist, sort of Protestant type environment, and sort of took that to its logical conclusions as well. And eventually, to cut a very long story very short, I sort of ended up in Greece with no real religious affiliation. I was just a sort of Bible Protestant, or something. I just the Bible, and that was it. I was just following the Bible, but I didn't have any sort of collective that I was in.
So we said we weren't going to get controversial, but I do have to put this to you.
Yes.
My wife and I went to Rome,
yes.
and we did what most tourists do, and we did a tour of the Vatican.
Of course, yeah.
And what I found difficult to square for me,
yes,
was this enormous wealth, this enormous opulence.
Yes.
All from in a church that represents some of the poorest people on earth.
Yes.
And those are the sorts of things that I find difficult to square.
Yes. Yeah, sure. I mean, that's why I've never been a Roman Catholic. That's another story.
I have to say, the one thing that the Jewish religion and the Roman Catholic religion have in common is that if you're born a Roman Catholic, whether you're religious or not, you're always a Roman Catholic.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's the same with the Jewish religion. You're Jewish by birth or by religion or both.
Yeah.
So even though I'm not religious, I'm still.
Yeah, well, you have that culture, don't you, as a culture? Yeah. But I think you can still change your spirituality, even if you have a certain cultural background. Spiritual things can happen in the spiritual plane.
Yeah, but spirituality though means different things to different people.
Yes. Okay. I mean, yeah. I mean, so as I say, to answer your question, I'm an Orthodox Christian now. And it's a combination of dogma, if you like. We have dogma as, the nature of Christ and our faith in Christ and the Holy Trinity. And these have been defined by the Holy Fathers of our church. But we also, there's a spiritual element. There's this has something to do with your heart and not just your mind. So it's not all about here. In fact, real orthodoxy, it's about here. And that's actually, physically speaking, it's something quite unexpected. If you just think religion is, ideas and practices, it's something which would come as a surprise, maybe.
Yeah, which brings me back, I think, to where I started. For me, it's just about being a good person. Regardless of the outside trimmings, if you like, about regardless of what hat you wear.
Yes,
it is about what ultimately.
Well, that's it. And I think the discussion would come down to what is being a good person, and how do you actually achieve that. And I think that's where you get into a deeper analysis of this whole topic. But unfortunately, time is running out on us.
Yeah. But I think we've arrived at a conclusion of sorts.
Yeah, that's it. And I think we've sort of opened this one, this important topic, which we'll probably touch on again as we go along. But I think it was an important one to get started.
And a fascinating one, and enjoyable for me to just to be able to see things from a different perspective. In my coaching business, I talk to people about small changes in perception can change everything, and just having a perspective from someone else's point of view.
Yeah, well, I would say the same. Always sharing with somebody else, finding exactly how their experience, which is so different. There's so much to be learned from that.
Yeah, but it's been thoroughly enjoyable, Peter. Thank you for sharing.
Well, thank you, Marcus. Thank you for sharing yours, and thank you for asking questions. And it's been a very useful time. Okay, well, that's the journalist in me, I suppose. But yeah, well, that's why I suggested this whole project, basically, is because of that journalistic interest you have. So that's a great benefit. Absolutely, but been fun, and it's been fascinating. Great. Well, lovely to speak again, Marcus, and soon we'll be resuming. Yeah, we'll do it again soon. See you then. Bye. Okay, cheers, Peter.